Welcome to the Retail Tech Podcast, where we talk about the full spectrum of technologies and implementation used in omnichannel and online retail. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at retailtechpodcast.com, and we always look forward to your feedback. I'm speaking with Art Lawida, President of commercetools US today. How are you, Art?
Good, Darius. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. So, Art, we've known each other for a little while and have interfaced, on different projects. And I find your experience fascinating in the, e-commerce area, and the history that you've been through, and then where you are right now. So, really wanted to share that with my audience. Why don't you start telling me a little bit about where you started in e-commerce and how it led you to where you are now?
Sure. I started e-commerce in 1998, which really was kind of the dawn of the ability to do transactions online for commerce in a serious way. I was working for Oracle at the time, and we were in a group called Advanced Technology Solutions. And our job was to bring the new products that Oracle had out into reality in front of customers. And the first project I worked on was actually Bertelsmann Online. If you remember those, Bertelsmann was the company that you would send, oh wow, this is really going to date me, that you would send 99 cents to, and they would send you back 30 CDs with,
Oh
whatever you
yeah,
wanted.
I
Yeah.
remember now. Okay, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah,
Okay.
BMG. It was, I mean, nobody even knows what CDs are anymore, practically. But yeah. So we went. The project was in New York, and our job was to implement Internet Commerce Server 1.0 at Bertelsmann at BMG in New York. And since that time, with a few diversions, I've been pretty much immersed in the e-commerce industry, the platform world. Uh, Quickly realizing, the first two stints there, one with Oracle, and then I moved over to a company called Broadvision. And Broadvision was one of those internet bubble darlings. It was also an e-commerce platform, but I think that their valuation at the peak was like $28 billion or something like that, crazy, back in 2001. And but it was a very good next step in e-commerce platforms. And then really saw that what we needed, what was more interesting for companies was SaaS, a SaaS version of e-commerce. And so I went to work for a small company called vCommerce out of Arizona, and they were really focused on a kind of a platform as a service. They did a lot of dropship back-end work, but they also had a front end. And it was a pure SaaS model. So our competition back in 2006, 7, 8 was Demandware. And we were the only two real SaaS players. And vCommerce didn't survive, but Demandware went on to flourish, as we know. Now a huge company just bought by Salesforce. So that model proved to be correct. But what we kept seeing was that these e-commerce projects were incredibly complex. And no matter what platform you used, it was very difficult for integrators and for clients to really understand how to use those platforms well. And that's what's brought me to my current position, where we have created, I would say, a revolutionary way to do enterprise software, and we've applied it to commerce. And that is to come to the market with a cloud-native, API-only commerce platform that creates a set of services that people can use and link into from their solutions, but doesn't require you to know anything about how our platform works to be able to use it.
Okay, so I think that's a pretty rounded experience, because a lot of times it actually helps going through the other systems, so you even appreciate the newer technologies more. And I think that's actually really good to see somebody that has basically grew up in the on the old systems actually you know taking the new technologies and the change, embracing it openly. A lot of people, unfortunately, are not as open to embracing new technology. And of course, there are many reasons. It's not just a simple thing to just flip a switch and get things changed over. But I think the attitude is the difference.
Yeah, and it really was. I owned my last company before this, and I've started a number of companies, but it was a Hybris integration company. And Hybris is a great, probably world's leading commerce platform. And when you dig into it, it has everything that you need inside of that platform that you would ever want to do for commerce. But to be able to use it, you really need to know that platform well, right? It takes a very long time to understand because there's so much in it, how much to use it. And what we were seeing time over time over time was that these projects on any kind of monolithic software would cause a lot of unnecessary pain for the end customers, and that's really what we're trying to solve here. And that's not because the platform wasn't great, because there are a lot of great monolithic platforms. It's because the approach of being a monolithic platform is something that we just can't sustain as an industry anymore. I mean, we can't have 5 and 10 million, $2-3 million projects just to get sites up and running. It doesn't make any sense anymore.
Right, which is really something that I've seen a trend going towards is the reduction in the size of the projects. Now, again, bringing up a new website or even a drastic upgrade is not just technology. A lot of it actually has to do with the UI and the UX. But the technology used to be a major key part of the project, just getting the platform up and running and programming it, and
Yep.
that part of the project is really shrinking with the I don't know if I can call it the API revolution. So and I think that's where we're seeing a lot of changes happening right now for everybody, the customers, the vendors, and system integrators.
It really is. And I think what we're seeing is that system integrators are either going to adapt to that or they're going to decline. So, you talk to systems integrators who today make their money because these platforms are so complex. And when we go and talk to them about becoming, partners and moving into this new way, it's scary because they don't know, they're not set up to do the things that a modern e-commerce client needs. And if you really look at what makes a successful e-commerce project, it's never the technology. The client is always interested in how do I sell more? How do I have better customer relationships? How do I partner with other companies more? And none of that is provided, very little of it is provided by the technology that they're using. And so what we're hoping to kind of also drive as a revolutionary idea is that your e-commerce partner, either the systems integrator or the media company you're working with, is really there to help you grow your business and much less to figure out how to use the technology.
Right. Well, so that's another topic of interest for myself is how this system integrator or SI picture is going to evolve. Um, it's the new technology that we're using, the API aspect of it and how it relates to quote unquote microservices. It's not
Hmm.
just a software change; it's an organizational change. So if an SI comes up and say, "Oh yeah, microservices is great. We're doing microservices." It's a lot more than just saying that, right? It's you do. They may know the software, they may know how APIs work, but do they have the organizational structure to actually do the project correctly?
Yeah, and I think there's two. I would like to separate for a minute There's cloud native API, which is what the commerce, or the platform that I'm currently working on, and then there's microservices, and those are two separate things and two separate disciplines. And so what we see is that what we're hoping is that today most digital agencies have been shut out of the commerce market because the platforms are so hard to work with, right? They're creative and they have HTML people and JavaScript people, but they don't necessarily have great people to work on the complex integration side. And what we're hoping and what we're working toward is those digital agencies enabled by this very easy to use cloud native commerce approach can now dive into the commerce world in a big way and build really compelling user experiences however they want using CMSs like Adobe or Hippo or Magnolia or or Sitecore. So the agencies can now jump into that commerce game without having to know anything about the commerce platform. On the flip side, if you look at what the role of the systems integrator can become now, it's to build these to work with the companies to have this microservice transformation of their infrastructure. And what we see in Europe, especially these days, is that instead of having, if you have this large conglomerate that has, say, 40 divisions or groups, today in the US, each one of those is likely to have their own commerce platform and their own front-end technology. And what you see in Europe is that they're starting to have, the systems integrators are now building a single search microservice that everybody shares, and a single search order inventory microservice that all those divisions share. And then, and then each business unit is just responsible for building their unique and compelling customer experience and keep their branding. And that gives you this tremendous leverage of IT then gets to manage all this hard stuff that nobody wants to do anyway. You remove the complexity of all of these platforms serving, all different needs, making, and centralize that in one place. But you allow the business owners to be as creative as they want on the front end. That's a transformation that takes a significant amount of technical expertise. And I know in Europe there are 20, 30, 40 million, even $100 million projects that are going on at big retailers to make that transition from a monolithic to a microservice approach.
Okay, so yeah, I mean it's a paradigm shift. It's not software as we knew it before, and it reverberates all throughout the organization. So what you mentioned about the SIs actually building microservices as opposed to implementing and installing monolithic platforms do you see the SIs in the global SIs, the largest ones or the smaller ones, actually catching on to that and actually doing things, getting prepared or starting that journey?
I see them starting that journey. I don't see them there yet. So if I look at the examples I'm thinking of in Europe where that's happening, it's really driven by the client. If you look in the US, the companies that are doing this are Walmart and Amazon. Amazon has been doing this for many years. They're also doing it internally but it's the internal IT department that's driving that, the architecture for that. And so I think SIs, as they realize that kind of the work's going to start drying up, I hope, around these monolithic platforms, they're going to start to really need to understand how to build these teams. And you're right in your assessment before. You need a totally different way of writing software than is done in a monolithic application. You need small teams. They need to be focused on a single set of functionality that has a clean interface and can play well with other API-driven services out in the cloud. And those teams look much, so instead of, everybody has their own database person, and everybody has their own data, and every service has its own database. Every service has its own interface. And so it's a much different, more loosely coupled way of building software. But in the end, it's much more efficient. It's dramatically more efficient because the single biggest reason for the efficiency gain is that you have a group that actually owns what they're doing, right? They can't say, "Oh, I can't get my job done because the database guy can't get to it," or the designer's not available, so it's going to be a week late. If that service goes down, everybody in the company knows exactly who to call, and so that ownership drives higher quality just naturally, and that's a huge advantage over a monolithic approach.
Okay, so the echos. So basically, what you're saying is that the SIs need to really walk the talk before they can sell it, right? They need to be practicing microservices before they can actually sell it.
Absolutely. We even at Commerce Tools, we've made that mistake. We tried to start selling it before we knew how to do it, and it wasn't until we actually had started delivering microservice-based solutions that we really understood what we were talking about. Because it really is not only, like you're saying, it's not only a way of doing software, but it's a psychological shift that the people and the organization need to go through to be successful in it.
Yeah, this reminds me a few years ago when I was working at one of the largest, probably the largest SI in the world. I was working on a proposal to introduce what I called at that time growth oriented teams. The concept of growth as it is used in marketing, in how the marketing and engineering teams are brought together in a lot of the software companies in the valley, and how that works. It's almost the same as a microservice, right? So when you're looking at a service, it has to be all encompassing, and growth takes it to another level of even the user experience, all and testing and improvement, so that it's not just developing the software or a service and then releasing it completely. So it was a really foreign idea at that time and didn't go anywhere. But I think that's the future. That's how Facebook, that's how Amazon, all of these companies, I think, are approaching it. So
Yeah, and it really is a different way of thinking about things. I mean, the end game for this, at least in my lifetime, I hope, will be an API economy. And a lot of people have talked about this, but today, why use my search if I have a search service out in the cloud and it has a published API, it should be and you had some social ratings around that so people could know how good your search service was and how what kind of things it could do for them, how much it cost. You could see people just going out and creating really innovative solutions using these cloud-based services without really even knowing anything about the companies they're getting it from, just knowing that it was a great service and something that they wanted to use. And so I see it really eventually breaking up the entire way software companies are created, right? You're not going to be creating software, you're going to be creating useful services that people can connect to.
right, and then I mean, even taking that even more uh, in depth, I think. So would SIs actually become almost software vendors? Because once you build a service, it could potentially be used across different customers, right? With some modifications.
Sure. The SIs have the ability then to create IP in a very efficient way that they could host or give somebody to the host. I think the whole idea of where it goes in the cloud is going to be different. I mean, I know that containerization is a huge thing that's moving this forward. We've been talking to and working with Google Cloud a lot recently on what they're doing with Kubernetes and how that all works. But the the idea would be that on demand everything, scaling up and down as needed on whatever services that live out in the cloud.
Yeah, this is it's interesting to be in the middle of this revolution. It's exciting for me.
Well, yeah, and at the very beginning, I mean,
Right.
if you look at
You're
actually the
right.
internet,
Not in the middle yet. We're in the
yeah,
beginning. Yes.
yeah.
Um,
So
so what, one point that you made, I want to understand it a little bit better. You said there's a difference between cloud native APIs and microservices. Were you referring to that as a technical aspect or the organizational aspect?
the technical aspect. I mean, for instance, the Commerce Tools. I work for a company called Commerce Tools, and we have a set of over 300 services out on the cloud, and each one of them has an API. So that's not you could think of them as microservices, but that's not they're not. It's constructed as an API into a platform. If you look at how a microservice would be, microservices are usually grouped around a set of functionality like order management or search or uh, taxation. Microservices tend to be larger than just API calls and grouped around functionality, and then you use them to get that piece of work done in the solution that you're creating. And so uh, there's a distinction both in the way the technology is and in the way in kind of the definition of what a microservice is.
Okay. So that's almost the same way that, for example, an API could be made up of several endpoints. A microservice could
Yeah.
be made up of several APIs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So now, as we all move through this process of changing over, what are the size of the projects used to be in the millions, and the times in what 8, 6, 8, 9 months minimum. How is that those like numbers changing? How are those numbers changing in your experience?
They're not. And this is, something that we talk to SIs and agencies about. What you're able to do is move a significant chunk of the budget that you used to spend on technology in a 6, 7, 9 month long project over to the marketing uh, development. And so while this approach makes it for small to mid-sized companies makes it easier to do the technology side of things, they still need to do the marketing. And where we see the value of that is, it used to be that a company would come in with $1.5 million budget, and they would take a monolithic platform, and for $1.5 million they would get the site running, and all the things that had been promised in the sales process around all the great marketing things that and the one-to-one personalization and the things never get implemented. The entire $1.5 million was done just doing the basic site. And what we're seeing now is the projects are about the same length and cost, but that technology part gets done fairly quickly, and you really are able to, in that same time frame, get a big chunk of marketing and the business's requirements in the project.
Okay. So if I look at the ecosystem of a typical enterprise project or mid-market project, you have the customer, you have the agency, you have the SI, and then you have the software vendors, right?
Right.
I mean, those are the major players. Um, so what you're saying is that the agencies are actually going to be able to just use the APIs that the new vendors are providing and really build things a lot faster, make the mock-ups come alive a lot faster than having to wait for the team to implement and get things started, right?
Absolutely. Part of that is because it's all in the cloud. Part of that is because if you can use an API, you can use our platform. There's no, use any, platform that's cloud native like ours. So things go really quickly. I mean, we've had partners build integrations into their systems in a week or two that were production ready. We recently I asked my team here to do an integration of Facebook store. It took 2 days. So the velocity that you can get out of this is dramatically increased simply because the technology isn't an issue anymore as long as you can use an API. I would say that where the typical systems integrator comes in is on the microservice piece. And so you could think of on a straight kind of website, mobile thing, now your ecosystem looks like just the digital agency and the software vendor. But if you have a complex one, a large one that has a lot of back-end integrations or things that they need to communicate with outside vendors, that's where the SI provides value. That's where they can come in and build these integrations and other things even on the front end as microservices, allow them to be used generally across the entire corporation, and save that corporation a tremendous amount of time and complexity.
Right. I mean, to be fair, SIs do a lot more than just, implement large monoliths. So I'm not saying they're going to
Sure.
go out of business, but I mean, their business model will and, might and will most likely change.
Absolutely. It has to.
So now I want to learn a little bit more about how commercetools works. So you mentioned about 300 APIs, or was it services or APIs?
300 different services, you could say, and each one of them has an API.
Okay. And now, if I look at a website, let's say an e-commerce website, or an e-commerce company that has a website and an app, that's probably a better example. There is a
Mm-hmm.
front end, right? The user interface, which could be the app, and it would be the website. Then there is the actual server side and the APIs that sit basically in between.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is a database where the data is stored. Um, Explain to me exactly where commercetools sits in that picture.
Sure. So our goal is to be a single API for all commerce across all front end endpoints. And so we sit out in the cloud and we become, whether you're creating an iOS app or an Android app or a website or an Internet of Things, we become that single API. And so in our platform, we have these 300 services cover. We have a great product information management system. We have order management. We have profile management. All the things that you would expect to have in a commerce platform. It's just that we provide them as a service. So we also have a database. And so you can think of it also as database as a service that allows you to extend our objects in whatever way you would like. It also allows you to create new objects in our database and access all of those through the API. And then the key to it is because we're trying to be a single API, we also don't need to be the system of record for anything. And so you can imagine, like, say you're asking for order status, and that information is coming out of a back-end SAP system. You still ask the question about order status to our API, and then we will integrate the back end to go out to SAP from commercetools and get that status and give it back to you on the front end. And so so instead of having kind of this web of calls going all over the place, all of your commerce applications and solutions, no matter where they are using a single API, getting all the information they need to do what they need to do, and delivering it back to the customer.
Okay, so that sounds almost like an added translation layer that you can add to even talk to legacy systems.
Absolutely. Most of our customers, certainly our larger customers, are connected through our API to many of it could be to their warehouse system, it could be to their ERP, and then they still go through us to get that information.
Okay. So now talking a little bit more about, Commerce Tools as a company, it's based out of Germany, right? And can you give us like a little history on that?
Sure, we were founded in 2006. Our CEO's name is Dirk Horig, a longtime e-commerce guy himself. He's been in and around the Munich tech scene for a long time, and founded this really because of very the same issues that I talked about. You know, the pain of continuing to have to customize on every single client they came to a monolithic platform. And so he founded in 2006. In 2011, we broke off a team in Berlin and started development on the current version of the Commerce Tools platform, and that came out into the market in 2013. In the DACH region in Germany, we're a much more well-known brand than we are in the U.S. We just started in the U.S. a year ago, but we're making tremendous progress, especially because, and this is an interesting point, we don't have a CMS. And so we have to partner with companies like Adobe and with Hippo and Magnolia, because the front end is not something we want to ever have anything to do with. And if you look at all the other commerce platforms, they compete on that front end piece. Everybody wants the glass. And what we're saying is, forget it. You know, let the CMS people, let Adobe drive every single bit of the commerce experience for the user, because that's what they're great at, and let us just inject commerce wherever the designers think it creates a great user experience. Totally different way of looking at it.
Right. And I think that definitely makes more sense because Adobe, especially definitely has a lot of experience and resources and knowledge on the experience. And, instead of trying to build your own, why not use that experience to benefit the customer?
Absolutely, and that's why we've announced a partnership with Adobe at NRF a few weeks ago. We're going to be expanding that at the Adobe Summit in a few weeks, which is huge for us. Also, we're really excited about working with some SIs like Sapient Razorfish on that level of business that know and love Adobe today. And so the hope is that today, if you look at any of the monolithic platform vendors, they always have some kind of. It's very difficult to use with a separate CMS, and they always kind of compete because nobody wants to give up the license revenue to another company. What's also great about us from a working together standpoint is our product has no license fees. We're totally committed to a pay for what you use model, and that gives a lot more room for both the initial build, to put more functionality into the build, but also for our CMS partners to be able to sell their software. So we don't compete in any other way. But we believe that in the future there won't be any more software licenses. Everything will be on a pay for what you use, and you'll have to prove that you're the best service out there in order to get paid.
Okay, so that's interesting. And I guess that to close, I want to dig into that a little bit more. The revenue model. Of course, initially the monoliths would charge millions of dollars to get started. Then Salesforce and SaaS started, which went to the subscription model. And what you're saying is that even that model is going to be phased out?
Yeah, we think so. We think that the model that makes sense is a much more, I would say, capitalistic model where you're getting paid for the work that you do as a service, for the value that you're providing in the moment, that you're always competing with every other person in the world that can create a service to be the best, and that your value lies in that. If you look at any monolith or even any subscription service, you say I buy Salesforce, I pay $50 a month. How much of Salesforce do I actually use? 10%, 20%, as a user, if I'm a power user, 50%, but you're paying for the other 50% you're not using. If I look at a monolithic, platform, an enterprise platform, you may use 20%. You may be paying $1 million license fee to use 20% of the software. right? We believe that the world is going to go to this model where, you really are paying for what you're using, and that's it.
Okay. And then, how is the actual, so let's say, for example, in the case of commerce tools, every API call, for example, gets billed as a unit. Is that how it works, or?
Well, but it's something like that. We basically build different models on API usage. However, the client can most easily understand that. So some it's number of orders, some it's number of calls to the PIM. But yeah, it's based upon how many
API
call, how
usage.
many, yep, API usage.
So there is another model that I think companies like Demandware actually were working on, which was also some companies get paid based on the performance as well. Like if you sell more, they get a piece of it. What do you think about
Yeah,
that model?
I think it's awful. If I was a retailer, I wouldn't want to be giving away a percentage of my revenue to a technology company. I would say, look, you provide the technology and let me, run my business. How much value are those companies providing to driving their client's business? I think the answer is some. As if you look at what Demandware's done over time, is they built more and more services around the platform to help drive revenue. But as a theory of how to build people, I don't think it's going to be around for very long because no retailer in the world, especially when they get up above $100 million, wants to be giving away a percentage of revenue.
Yeah, that kind of like reminds me as some even physical retail landlords, especially in the area that I live in, Orange County, they not only charge rent, they also get a piece of the revenues, which is,
Wow.
I was shocked when I first heard of it. So, but I mean, they definitely provide a unique way, a unique experience and ecosystem in the areas. But again, that's like it sounds just like the same. So you definitely have to earn what you're getting from the customer, and that if you're on that kind of a model, you need to heavily invest in adding more services, like you say that Demandware has done. So
Yeah, and also, one of the different big differences that drives our ability to do this is we are on a totally modern DevOps containerized model. So we are publishing 4 to 5 production updates every day to our platform. All the clients get that. They're all able to access it immediately. Uh, that's incredibly different than companies like Demandware or anybody else that has a monolithic approach, where they have to do releases and they have to do regression testing, and it could take hours or days to get through that process. And so that allows us to drive innovation at 10 times the speed that a monolithic platform company can, just because we can publish on the fly.
right. And I mean, to be fair, I've actually heard similar talk and the realization about the new software paradigm from most of the vendors. It's just the question is how fast can they change, if they even can change. Sometimes
Right.
it's just you can't. What do they say? Yeah, put a lipstick on a pig or something. Some kind of a phrase.
Yeah.
So it just sometimes it's better to start from scratch.
And that's what we did. That's why
Yeah.
we broke off the team and put them in Berlin. We knew that there was no way that a team with the monolithic mindset could create something like we were trying to create.
Right. Okay, one last question. What would be a typical implementation project when you sign up a new customer? What's the project like? What steps?
There's absolutely no difference between that for us and any other. You have to do requirements analysis. You go through, it's a full life cycle e-commerce project. The only difference is you don't need to have specialized developers. You don't need to know anything about our platform, and you don't need to invest so much in the commerce software. But from a commerce perspective, you still need designs, you still need requirements, you still need, testing, all the things that you would need anywhere else.
Right. Okay. So you just need to have a development team in-house that's familiar how to work with APIs and endpoints and the new software
Yeah,
model.
and we support nearly every, front end you can. So we have a PHP SDK, and we have a Java and a Node and a .NET SDK. And so the great thing is everybody has a team like that, and that team doesn't have to learn anything else except what they already know to be able to create a great commerce application.
Right.
And we think that's revolutionary.
It definitely is different, and I wish you all the best and applaud you guys on really pushing this because I personally don't know of any other commerce platform really on this model and going at this focus level on this model. So I hope other people also pick up. I know it's going to be competition for you, but this is a big C. I think the rising tide will lift all of us.
Yeah, I hope so. And obviously, you can go to our website at commercetools.com, and you can fill out a form, and you can talk to me or one of our incredible salespeople about how this can help people. So
Okay,
please contact us.
great. And I'll add the link to the show notes to the notes so people can actually contact you. Thank you so much, Art. It was fascinating talking to you. Learn a lot.
All right, thanks, Darius.
Take care.